They say like if you're doing stuff without the aesthetics prompt, it looks like this. And then if you're doing it with the aesthetics prompt, it looks like that. Personally, I think both of these are pretty bad. This one definitely looks better, of course, but it's not like that much better. Same thing over here. So I don't know if the guys that made this just weren't like actually crazy front-end devs or anything like that. But I personally think my workflow of just going to one of these websites and then copying the screenshot over and then moving everything into Claude Code is like way higher quality. But there are other cool ones here. Context 7 is pretty nice. Context 7 basically just allows you to search through any API doc without really having to like know anything about the API docs themselves. You know, if you're working with like 3 or 4 different tools, you just install this as a plugin and then it'll automatically shrink and then compress API documentation from the sources over to Claude, and then it can read it in a very token efficient manner and do cool things with. None of these things I want to say are required. Vanilla Claude Code does really, really well without any sort of extensions or plugins at the moment. But, you know, just worth us chatting briefly about that. And then there are 2 major marketplaces right now that are sort of, one major marketplace right now that's supported by Claude. It's this Claude Code plugins directory, which is the Claude-plugins-official repository. You can find all of the plugins just by going to plugins, and you'll see there's a big list of ones that they support right out of the box. So they have Agent SDK Dev, they have Code Review, they have C# LSP example plugin. But then there are also open marketplaces. So if you go to Claude Plugin Marketplace, you'll see that there are a few other ones that people have put together here. So this, for instance, is the Claude Code Marketplace put together by a third-party resource. You could say Anthropic wants me to take down this website. That's pretty funny. With, you know, like ChatGPT prompts, let's see, superpowers. I don't know exactly what that does. We have the Context 7 again, a bunch of Claude Code skills that looks like some other people have put together, although not all of these links are going to work. And yeah, you know, the plugin installation process is pretty straightforward, as you guys saw earlier. So I'll leave it at that. I think plugins are sort of going to be deprecated and probably just absorbed into skills at some point, so I don't want to spend forever on them. Okay, and finally, we have subagents, which I think a lot of people here were waiting for. I want you guys to know that subagents aren't like a cure-all. These things aren't actually that incredible. You can do more or less everything that you could do with subagents as of the time of this recording, just with like a normal master agent. But subagents do speed things up a little bit, and then they also allow you to parallelize your workflow, which can be quite useful in specific circumstances. One major issue that people currently have with subagents is they consume a ton of tokens, and then in doing so can also cost a fair amount, especially when you go to agent teams, which as of the time of this recording is 7 times the token usage of just using like one single Claude thread like I've been doing throughout this course. But subagents are still pretty useful to know. And so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you through example, and then we can actually look more into like the subagent spec and stuff like that. So you know how earlier we built this system, the skill, which fetches, classifies, and labels 100 emails with 0 failures? What I'd like to do now is I'd basically like to turn this skill into a subagent. So what I'm going to do is I will remove this so we're not loading any more stuff into context. Hey, I'd like you to turn this Gmail-label flow into a subagent. The reason why is because I want you to parallelize your work. Instead of it taking 36 seconds to fetch, classify, and label 100 emails, I want you to be able to spawn 10 subagents that do all of those simultaneously and then return the results. I'd like you to do this using the subagent spec. If you don't know what that is, do a little bit of research on subagents. It's an Anthropic and Claude Code feature that's quite well supported by our current workspace structure. And once you've built the subagent using Sonnet-4.5, I want you to roll it out as a test and then show me how much faster it is with some sort of timing instrumentation. Okay, so I have all that here. I'm now just going to feed it into my prompt. If we open up this little thinking tab, it's going to start by researching the subagents and then building a parallelized Gmail label flow that spawns multiple subagents to classify emails simultaneously. It'll use Sonnet 4.5 because it can load much more into context, probably read all my emails, and then it can actually go through this whole process and then essentially parallelize it and significantly improve the probability and speed that these things are working well and fast. The very first thing it's going to do is actually spin up a bunch of subagents to do research. So that's what this task little bubble is, right? When it says research Claude Code subagents, what it's actually doing is it's giving this task to a subagent called the research subagent. There's another subagent as well, like the search subagent. So it'll actually search through my workspace to see if there are any pre-existing subagent patterns. And then because it's capable of spawning these simultaneously, typically retrieves the results much faster than normal. So that's kind of fun. It's a little bit meta of Claude Code to do that without really understanding what subagents are out of the box. Okay, it's now going to create a subagent directory inside of my .claude folder, and then it's going to populate it with all the subagent spec parts and everything else. And what's really cool is we're using subagents alongside skills in this instance, and that's what I'd usually recommend. I don't recommend just like creating subagents for the sake of subagents unless they're very specific ones. I'll show you guys a couple of them in a moment, but for the most part, like use them where it makes sense. Use them in situations where you want to parallelize the workflow and be a lot faster. Okay, and then because we just generated the subagents in a previous instance, we actually have to call the subagents in another Claude Code instance. So I just had to make a new one, basically. What it's going to do now is spawn a bunch of subagents for me. Okay, so that's what these tasks are. So as you can see, classify email chunk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So all 10 classifiers are now running in parallel. We now have all 10 task outputs here, which is pretty cool. It's now absorbing all these task outputs. And we're operating at a much higher level of speed than we were before, right? So now it's recording the time, and then it's going to merge and apply. Classification took 19 seconds, wall clock time for 100 to complete. And then let's see the total time speed up. Okay, so in this instance, because we ran the same number of emails, we did 100 versus 100, we only saved 6 seconds. So what I want to show you guys now is I want to show you guys how to do this at scale. So instead of 100 emails, I want to do 1,000. Excellent work. I'd like you to classify 1,000. The benefits of the speed up are most likely not going to be at the same level of scale, but they will become evident when we go at a much higher level of scale. So now we're going to run 1,000 of these, aka 1,000 emails split into 10 chunks of 100 that are being classified in parallel with 10 subagents, considering that every time took, I think, like 19 seconds or something like that per. I think it's going to be a lot faster, so we'll see. Okay, some of these task outputs are now starting to complete. It's been maybe 15, 20 seconds. I'm not sure exactly how long. But as they're all coming back, you see these little gray bubbles turn into green bubbles. Okay, we ended up having an issue where the prompt was too long, essentially because all of these subagents returned massive strings of text with every single email. For whatever reason, when you combine all this into, the parent thread, just way too long, and it ran out of context. So what I did is I just copied over everything, and then I gave it to another instance up here. And I basically said, hey, this is a little too long right now. I keep running into, prompt too long output. So I think we ran out of context. I'd like you to modify this so we don't run out of context. If the subagents don't have to return the actual text to the parent agent, that would be ideal. Then I ran it in parallel for all 10. And now we're just redoing it. And at the end of it, it labeled 987 out of 989 emails. I didn't time that end to end. If I had to guess, it'd probably be somewhere around like a minute or so, which means we are now classifying 1,000 emails in a minute, whereas 100 was at 36. And this is really the power of subagents. Subagents basically allow us to take some query and then split it up into 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever. Run them all, synchronously at the same time. And then once they're done, they just take the outputs of each of these threads and then combine them into the main one. And so, there are a couple of other use cases for subagents, but for the most part, it's going to be something like this. Like if you really wanted to use subagents in an economically valuable fashion, this is usually how you would do so as of the time of this recording. Subagents are fantastic, but keep in mind, like most of the time, they're going to be less intelligent than the parent agent. And so you want to reserve the parent agent for taking the outputs of each of these subagents and combining them and doing something with them, not just spawning, 500 things in parallel to run for no reason. Strategically speaking, some other things about subagents.